What makes you proud to be British, if I ask the question like that? The majority of every ethnic group believe kids raised in Britain should be taught to be proud of being British. That's according to a new report. The Policy Exchange highlights 72% of people recognise Britain as a force for good. People take pride in achievements. There are some obvious ones on the list here: the World Wars, Magna Carta, abolition of slavery, industrial revolution is on there as well. Let's speak to one of the authors of this report, social policy analyst Rakib Ehsan. Rakib, always good to speak. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm very well, Ian. How are you?
Yeah, good as gold. Thanks. Nice to have you with us. And I would say, you know, there's a fairly encouraging beacon that's come out of this report, certainly against the backdrop of some of the kind of stories we read of late. This seems to be pretty positive on balance.
No, I'd say so. It's a feel-good report, isn't it? And I think some of us, we won't find the findings particularly surprising, but it's nice to see that survey data nonetheless. The fact that nearly 3 in 4 people, 72% of the general public, believe that British children of all backgrounds should be taught to be proud of their own national identity and history, with the majority also believing that Britain has done more good than harm in the world. I think these are hugely positive findings, and it really shows that we have a golden opportunity, actually. There's a great deal of public support and appetite for a celebration of our national history, heritage and traditions within our education system.
Why is there a sense, you know, and I suppose this is a slightly separate point, but it does feed into it. There is a sense that there isn't a sort of a kind of multicultural harmony in the way that some people envisaged it, and in a way that this report perhaps highlights it. There is a, you know, any other day of the week, as I said at the beginning, we could be doing stories, and I could be talking to you, Rakib, on stories that are sort of the antitheses of this.
No, absolutely, and I think that much of that is because we've seen the importation of what I consider to be very radical identitarian ideas from the United States, for example. And the reality is Britain is not America. We're not a relatively youthful experiment which is struggling to get to grips with on the soil slavery and very recent forms of racial segregation. Britain, if you take, for example, the Battle of Bamber Bridge during World War II, you had working class pub landlords telling American commanders, no, we don't have any colour bar here. In a Lancastrian village. And I think we have very proud working class anti-racist traditions which should be celebrated and taught to our children in history lessons. I also think that there's a tendency for certain progressive liberals to represent ethnic minorities, but to the point that they're not actually reflective of their own traditional and patriotic views. I think to the point that they're actually quite far distant from those views, and I think that is a very serious problem.
Yeah, there is a sort of quite obviously there's a sort of left-wing thinking where it's kind of the cool disposition is to not be proud to be British, even if you've not really looked into it, and even if you don't really believe it. That's what you have to say to wear those particular stripes, is that you know, I hate everything, the war, the subjugation of many countries, slavery is always in there as well, and to almost live your life by that side of the argument rather than the one we're discussing.
No, absolutely. I also think there's a very positive story to tell when it comes to that smooth transition from empire to Commonwealth, which was spearheaded by the late Queen Elizabeth II, where you have this voluntary association of nations in the Commonwealth. And I think that it's very important that people realise that other former European colonial powers, they've not been able to rebuild those post-colonial ties as successfully as we have. And I think we should be proud of that.
Indeed. Just on that point, we mentioned empire and the like. There's this other story at the moment, Rakib, about reparations, although the British government has said no plans to pay it. Barbados looking at 200 billion quid to be, you know, spread over countries that were affected. If I was one of those countries, I wouldn't blame them for asking. I'd give it a go as well. But is there any intelligent, authentic argument around that in the 21st century?
I think it's very important that we're future-oriented and we look ahead. I think that a better argument, which can be made from a British perspective, is that we should look to bolster trade and investment ties with those Caribbean nation states and ultimately look to deepen our economic collaboration. Let's look forward as opposed to looking at the past in a divisive manner.
There it is. Rakib, thank you. Rakib Ehsan, with a social policy analyst from the politics, part of that group, part of the group of people who wrote that report. Thank you to him. Emma Rock says, proud to be British. There's too much, apart from the obvious, the amount we have contributed to the arts, science and sports. Pretty much all sports: football, cricket, rugby, golf, basketball, hockey, rounders, badminton, tennis, snooker, dance. What about our writers, says... it was Emma, wasn't it? What about our writers? Shakespeare, Tolkien, Dickens, Roald Dahl, Agatha Christie, C.S. Lewis, Wordsworth, Lewis Carroll, Ian Fleming, J.K. Rowling. Scientists: Alan Turing, Stephen Hawking, Isaac Newton, Darwin, Richard Dawkins, Tim Berners-Lee. This little island has contributed to the world more than any other. I think that should say. Rule Britannia, says Emma. Thank you, including writing texts as well. There's just a nice list. Hard to argue with any of that. And if you did try and balance it out and say, how does that look in comparison, say, to other countries? And it's not a competition. But if the argument is, you know, the United Kingdom or Great Britain has only ever done bad things around the world, that's clearly hogwash, right? That's just a nonsense argument that is put out there, you know, maybe to make some people, perhaps mostly on the left, I would assume, by definition, to make them feel better about something. You know, I hate this place, the sort of self-flagellation, the blame yourself. We are terrible, we've done awful things. And I don't know which country you could point to that hasn't historically done some pretty awful things, either to its own people or to others. I just sense that's part of the sort of almost the human story rather than the British one. And back in the day, when countries were sort of gathering it all together to do their bit, I guess Great Britain got in there first. Because I promise you, had Great Britain not existed, if anyone thinks all of those darker parts of global history would never have happened, then you're a Looney Tune, frankly. They would have just happened under the direction of somebody else. Stuff happened that was terrible in the past, and we modify, we progress, we learn, we adapt, and when necessary as well, we apologise and we move ahead. And I'm pretty sure people in France or Spain or, oh my goodness, how many nations would you have to go through before you found a squeaky clean one?